Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Rolka. Thank you for checking out my video. This is Community Questions, where I solicit questions on the Community tab on my channel's homepage, and you very generously offer your thoughts, questions, suggestions, and things like that. Mostly questions, but there's a few thoughts in the kind of allotment here too. I'm going to get right started with this. I want to remind you that this is a chaptered video. So if you hover over the timeline, then you'll see like little pop-ups of the questions. I post the questions in the description. If you want to read through little snippets of the questions, you can do that as well. And there's time code information in the description, so you can skip ahead to the stuff that is relevant to you, and then you can get on with your day. Right. I'm so out of shape after long silences of COVID isolation. I'd like to know where to start building my voice back again and what to be careful of, please. A very, very good question. I have seen that question in a variety of formats come up from time to time on the channel. I kind of wonder why you stopped singing. There's so many resources to keep you going, even if you can't go to your normal rehearsals or normal teacher interactions or things like that. There's still so many good resources. And if you are taking lessons and you're not recording them, see if that's a possibility, because that can be an excellent resource to fall back on in those kinds of times. That being said, look out for vocal fatigue. Take it really, really slowly. Be gentle and kind to yourself. And practically speaking, start in the center of your range and work outwards from there as you come back into good vocal shape. Be sensitive to the sensations of your body and your voice. Take it slow, but regular. 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20, whatever it is, whatever you can sustain from a day-to-day basis, get into a daily practice, and you will quickly come back into shape. I have every expectation, especially if you've had really, really good training before the COVID thing happened. Thanks, Jeff, for helping me pass a higher level choir audition. Congratulations, that's wonderful. I'm glad to serve what role I could. My soprano voice was so out of shape after years of lax technique and the occasional belting musical piece. I have a BA in music, but that was 20 years ago. I went through vocal rehab for the past 2 months and had to start daily doing your gentle soprano warm-up for people who have been sick. You can probably hear my voice could benefit from that as well, which I've been doing off camera, of course. My second passaggio was so crackly, but now I've got my high C back, thanks to your warm-ups and appoggio instruction. Thanks again. Actually, I thought that was a question, so but it's not. You're very welcome. I'm really glad to help, and thank you for writing in. I appreciate that. Continuing on. When transitioning to my upper head voice, I'm a soprano, so for me that's around G5. I find it's hard not to bring up the weight of my voice up there and thus strain. My voice is on the heavier side, and I find it hard to navigate that part of my range. What could help? Descending practices would be my suggestion for you. So when you're, it doesn't have to be the entirety of your registration event practice, but start in an area right below the secondo passaggio, make your way across the secondo passaggio, and just work descending patterns. And then in the next round, start a semitone higher. Little stints of a couple different scale patterns. You could also work from the top down entirely. So you might start above the secondo passaggio, descend, take a pause, start again, a semitone lower, descend, take a pause, so on and so forth. The idea here is to start the passage in the area near the secondo passaggio. And what this does for us is it causes us to start to approximate, to begin to anticipate is a better word, the engagement required, the openness required, the modifications of the vowels required. And in so doing, we get better and better tonal onsets, we get better intonation, we get better tone quality, more consistency. And then we can work on doing the exercises ascending to that pitch. Typically, things like vocal strain, the habits around that, those get created on ascending passages more so than on a descending passage. So we sort of circumvent the habit in this way, and then we apply the practice to the ascending scale. I do hope that helps. Tips on auditioning for my first college-level musical and how to pick a good monologue, where to locate a good monologue, books, online PDFs, websites, etc. So, awesome. Congratulations on getting up and going and doing that. I hope that this gets to you in time to help you with this. You haven't said whether or not you're in a music program at university, but if you are, the obvious thing, of course, is to talk to your teacher. Like, talk to them and ask them what they would suggest you use. In general, pick something that you are very, very comfortable with. This is not necessarily the time to learn new repertoire or new monologues or things like that. Go with something that you know you can ace with your eyes closed and you know, with only one ear open, and you know, you've just woken up at 3 a.m. and you've got to do it. Like, go with that piece that you know so well that it is effortless, assuming that those pieces suit the audition requirements. And in some respects, I've put the cart before the horse here, but make your process of choosing your pieces, your monologues, etc., make that predicated on the requirements of the audition. So scrutinize the audition requirements quite severely. You might also do that with your instructor and come to a decision around what you know. Like, do you have current repertoire, current monologues, things like that, that you can apply to this audition? If not, how much time do you have? Can you learn new pieces? And what would best suit your specific tessitura, like your range, your vocal range, your dispositions for monologues, and the audition requirements, and the character of the piece. You might also consider the director and what has worked with that director in the past. I think that's probably more appropriate for sort of professional kind of audition practices, because in this case, you know, the person for whom you'll be auditioning is most likely another university professor, and so hopefully they would be a little bit less biased than someone working off Broadway or on Broadway or something like to that effect. But you might consider what has worked in the past, like the parts and the pieces that have been used for the musical that you are auditioning for. And I do hope that helps, but hopefully you've got an instructor there at university that you can talk to. Go over the audition requirements, compare it against what your existing repertoire is and whether you've got something that suits it, that you're super comfortable with. And if not, hopefully you've got enough time to get as comfortable as you can with a new piece or pieces, monologues, etc. I'd love to hear of if you know anything about more obscure techniques for singing, like subharmonics, overtone singing, throat singing, etc. Not expecting a how-to, but just curious if you've heard much or had any experience yourself. I've certainly heard these things. I do not myself personally experiment with them because my main thing is the secondo passaggio and appoggio technique across the secondo passaggio, such that we get as seamless and connected a sound quality across that registration event. There is an artist, Seth, I'm blanking on his last name unfortunately, but he wrote sort of kind of indie songs, and he would blend Tuvan throat singing into the indie thing. and it was unbelievably cool. Like, not necessarily the kind of music that I personally want to make, but it was really something to listen to, and I got to be I got to see him perform a couple times, and it was just so cool. It was like the coolest thing. So I have an admiration for those techniques, and I think they're really, really neat. I personally do not practice them, and I probably won't, just because my artistic pursuits lie in other directions, and there's plenty of things for me to still learn and work on when it comes to just singing with what I consider to be a neutral tone production. I'm a decent singer, and as such I ended up teaching one of my best friends. But I'm not really sure how to really start with which technical exercise I should start to build up his chest voice. He tends to go immediately to head voice. We now mostly practice songs and then tackle the obstacles he encounters while singing them, but I need to get him more into theory and scale practice. So what would you recommend I start with? Thanks so much for all your content. It's really helped me taking my singing up a notch while preparing lessons for my friend. That's really great. I think it's really, really cool that you're working with your friend in that capacity. I have to say that the approach that you have already taken sounds pretty good. I will admit that that is generally the approach that I would take in a more intermediate vocalist, bordering on the advanced, where a lot of the fundamentals of vocal technique are already habitually in their practice, so that they're singing with a fairly habitual good alignment of vowels, making good vowel modifications into the zona de passaggio and good appoggio practice, all that kind of stuff. Like, with those habits well established, the practice that you have adopted is really good. That being said, it can also work really, really well with the new vocalist, because it kind of sets the stage for why we're doing these things. At a certain point, one begins to realize that the warm-ups, for example, on my channel are really technical exercises, and they will do a lot to facilitate your artistic pursuits in the songs that you are singing. But for beginners, sometimes that can get overlooked, and we can focus so much on the technical aspects of their voice that we miss providing them with that really vital little reason for why we're doing these exercises in the first place. In terms of finding exercises for your friend, identify, and especially, let's talk specifically about the chest voice. Identify the vowels that are what I would think of as like their anchor vowels. The ones that, in your opinion, to your ear, are the most well balanced. In other words, when your friend begins to sing them, the tonal onset is typically very responsive. The note comes in tune. They can perhaps sing a 5-note scale in their chest voice with reasonably good consistency, with a tone quality and a vowel sound that you agree with. In other words, for my chest voice, the E vowel that I just sang should be reasonably narrow, but neither too tight, nor should it have any of the reflections of vowel modifications that you would hear in the zona de passaggio. It should be a narrow, kind of like I'm talking, but I'm sustaining it, though it's a little bit more open than just a standard spoken E vowel. It's not quite that narrow. Usually E is a good place to start, but that's not necessarily always the case. As the instructor, identify the vowels that respond best for your friend in that comfortable range of their voice, and begin to connect the dots between that vowel and the other cardinal vowels. This is what I'm doing in the warm-up videos on YouTube. So when you identify it, let's just say for the sake of argument it's E, ask them to maintain that tone quality and change to A at the 5th. And if the tone quality changes appreciably, well, there is your inroad to start the teaching process. And you can try loads of different exercises in order to get them to begin to understand vowel alignment and make those connections. And really, that just opens the door for which you go forth through. So that's a beginning. I hope that helps. Again, E might not be that beginning vowel for them. A lot of times it is, but you'll have to listen and be the judge. That's part of the gig when you're being the instructor. All right. Hey Jeff, I have 2 questions. The first one is, what's the proper structure for singing practice? What should I do first? Should I structure it based on my weaknesses, or should I balance and practice all techniques? A little bit of each, really. It doesn't pay to only focus on the weaknesses, because we're going to use our strengths to help those weaknesses. So you have to identify your strengths, support them, enhance them, make them a part of your practice. And quite frankly, this also just starts to feel good too. We want to feel good about what we're doing. Use those strengths to inform and work on the weaknesses. So if you have vowel alignment issues, or you have some vowels that don't respond very well across registration events in your voice, for example, use the ones that respond well to work on those that need help. Second, can I practice singing on a sitting or standing position? I've been sitting ever since I started practicing because I believe that it would make my breathing stronger, since there are people who can't sing very loud on a sitting position. But it's just my belief. I might be wrong. Yeah, I've never seen anything to suggest that that would be true, I'm sorry to say. So you can still believe that if you want, but I haven't seen anything that supports that premise. What I can tell you is that the positions that singers use when they are standing for their practice are meant to isolate muscle groups and to give us the most advantageous position for singing so that we can better observe and work with our voice. If you sing a lot when seated, as I do here at the piano, the process then is to compare and contrast the performance of your voice from a standing position to a seated position, trying to make the seated position match the performance that you can achieve when you're in that idealized standing posture. And it's worth mentioning here too that that idealized standing posture is one that we eventually we'll probably always come back to in our practice to make sure that we are in fact, supporting our voice in the most effective way that we possibly can, but that we can move around from. When you watch, theater people, for example, or opera singers, they're singing and moving a lot of times. They may post up from time to time when they've got a particularly challenging passage or the peak of a phrase where they're singing in a high tessitura or something to that effect. But we want to be able to move around and sing. The postures that we use for our singing practice help us understand how our body works so that we can work towards having that kind of freedom and still have good appoggio breath management technique when we are moving around or playing an instrument or in a seated position. So go from the standing position and then adapt it for your seated posture. My range isn't huge, but I use some of your baritone and some of your tenor warm-ups. Should I be doing both warm-ups each day? If it's working, sure. If there's a problem, then you may have to assess that and find out what's going on. And it also depends greatly on which warm-ups you're using. Not all of my warm-ups are the same, obviously. So some of them will cover really, really wide ranges. Others don't at all. And in the baritone and tenor fox, there's a lot of overlap. It's not as if, on the piano, for example, it's not as if baritone is here, tenor is here, like alto, and then, whatever. Like, that's not how it works at all. The baritones will certainly have some lower pitches, but with good registration event technique they can certainly get to those G's and A's. Tenors, while their comfortable range might be somewhere here, can still sing these notes, and I can sing these today because of the being sick. But you'll notice, like, there's an awful lot, like the vast majority of those ranges are overlapping, and it's true for the other Focs as well. Now, yes, between the soprano Foc and the baritone Foc, there's very, very little overlap. But if you're doing baritone and tenor videos and you're enjoying it and you're seeing progress, carry on. Hey Jeff, what would you say is the ideal warm-up timing before a show or a performance, specifically a night-evening performance, given that you've already done your morning warm-ups, 30 minutes or an hour before the performance? Thank you. Your exercises have really helped me a lot. Well, thank you for that. I am very, very glad that the exercises are helping. Unfortunately, I can't be particularly specific in terms of your warm-up. It's going to kind of boil down to what works best for you, the circumstances around your performance and the gig in general. If you are talking a lot right before the gig, that could change when you need to warm up. For example, if you're a singer-songwriter and you're doing cafe gigs and you are mingling with the people who've come to see you, as you should, I would advise you to leave some time before the performance where you can isolate yourself off away from people and talking, and do your warm-up right before the gig so that you reset the vocal mechanism, get your vowel alignments and your body working in a singing capacity as opposed to a talking comfortably capacity. And I might add that a lot of what you're hearing in my voice is due to overuse, talking too much, teaching, talking, YouTubing a little bit more than is strictly advantageous. So I've had to make some changes to try to rest my voice more, not from singing, from talking. So be very, very conscious of that if that's part of what you are addressing. If you gig or do shows regularly, I would advise you to try out some different scenarios and see what works best to you. I would also incorporate this into this when you eat, like hydration, things like that. Keep a notebook if you can, or just do it on your phone, whatever. You know, what did you eat? When did you eat it? How was your gig that night? When did you warm up? How long did you warm up? What did you warm up with? How was your gig that night? After a few cycles of doing this, you'll start to see a pattern evolve, and you can get the best scenario for your pre-gig warm-up routine. Tips on modifying lyrics, consonants for singing. Varies depending on genre. Yeah. So, a very, very famous opera singer once said that they will change the vowel to whatever is necessary to have the best sound of their voice. Period. No constraints there, right? And now this person was speaking specifically of notes above the secondo passaggio, so high tessitura singing. I really need to get I think I know who the person who said that was, but I want to double check the quote before I quote them on it. So I'm withholding my guess as to the name. But yeah, different genres, however, have different requirements. So if you're in theater, for example, then there's a limit to how much you can modify your vowels and consonants because you have to be understood. That's part of the gig. Singer-songwriters, rock singers, things like that have much more latitude than the theater person does, in my opinion, because that onus of intelligibility is not nearly so high. Even though you want to be understood, the theater person, like, people are going to miss the story if they're not being understood. So, that being said, when you've considered the genre that you're singing in, anything that disrupts the flow of air is disadvantageous to us. It's much more disadvantageous above the secondo passaggio, and even in the zona di passaggio than elsewhere in the range. So you have more flexibility when you're below the primo passaggio. You have less flexibility, and you need to do more of those modifications above the primo passaggio and especially at and above the secondo passaggio. So if I could give you one overarching idea, is that still being sensitive to genre, do more than you think you should. Do more than what sounds good in your head, because the modifications in your head, generally speaking, sound much more dramatic than they are externally. And 9 times out of 10, when I'm teaching those concepts, the difficulty is not in coming back from the modification, but it is getting enough modification to really help the vocalist get those phrases to work. So do more than you think. Ramp it back if, upon reviewing a recording, for example, it's outside the realm of your genre's requirements. How to find opportunities to get your music and voice out there to sell for the public. Things like auditioning, record deals, and more. I'm quite new to this, so any info would be appreciated. Without knowing exactly what it is you're creating, I would first say that it has never been a better time to do that. I would prioritize the creation of your materials. And you haven't even said that you're making songs, if I'm not mistaken. Your music and voice. So I'm kind of assuming that you're talking about songs here, but I could be wrong. So forgive me if that's the case. But it's never been a better time. The way that you capture it and put it out into the world is less important than the time that you spend in the creation of it. So if you're writing songs, make them the absolute best songs that you can. I mean, you still want to churn through them. I mean, don't spend a year writing a 3.5-minute pop song necessarily, because part of making these things, part of doing them is doing a lot of them. It's the teacher splits the art class into half that are making one vase for a term, and the other half are just making as many vases as possible. And, you know, at the end, they have to each give one vase, right? And, you know, the side of the class that is doing like endless vases comes up with the best vases because they've just run through that many generations. So, you know, run through your songs, make your art. And when you listen to it and you're feeling good about it, then release it. There are many resources that are available to you. There's a couple that I would direct you to. One, since you mentioned record labels, you might try this Moses Avalon, Confessions of a Record Producer. This talks a lot about record deals and how that works. It's the versions are updated regularly, but it's a bit more old school record deal and why maybe that's not necessarily the best way to go. A more newer text on this concept is How to Make It in the New Business of Music, and this is Ari Herstand. These I don't have any I don't have any affiliations with these authors. I'm not getting like kickbacks from referring these books to you. But this covers a lot of bases, and it covers a lot of different information about making it in a variety of different aspects of the music industry. And those are good places to start. So I hope that helps. You know, maybe next community questions, be a bit more specific, and I can maybe address a little bit more closely what it is that you're looking to do. But for a starting point, I would look at those things, and I would, of course, get started making your art, and good luck to you. Moving on. How to add strength to mixed voice. For tenors, just learning how to mix. Focus on balance. Focus on balance. The strength in the sound of our voices, in the zona di passaggio and above the secondo passaggio, is largely a function of the release of the vocal mechanism. So if you're trying to make it do something, you are almost certainly using more muscle tension in the larynx and in the surrounding tissues than is absolutely necessary. Cultivate the scenario for those tissues to be as released as possible. In other words, they're only using as much engagement of the musculature, the thyroarytenoid musculature and the cricothyroid musculature, as is absolutely necessary. So focus on your breathing, on the suspension and the expansion of your rib cage, the suspension of the air column, and allow the mechanism to vibrate as freely as you can. This will in turn create all sorts of other sympathetic resonances and nonlinear functions in the voice. There was an article in Scientific American that was done some years ago that talks about this in great detail, if you are so interested. And that in turn will build strength. So it is in the balance and the release of the mechanism that you will have strength, not only in the zona di passaggio, the mixed range, but above the secondo passaggio in the cricothyroid dominant singing voice, the so-called head voice. And I realize that today, head voice, mixed voice, and falsetto, unfortunately, those three terms can be used synonymously. I do not use them that way, and I don't know how you're using the word mix in your description, but it doesn't really matter. The answer is still to focus on the balance and the release of the mechanism, and that will provide you with all the strength that you'll need. Hi Jeff, I hope you're well. Love your channel. Thank you. I've been a little bit better. The overuse thing kind of threw me for a loop, but I'm fine, and I'm getting better too. So you should have heard me a couple days ago. I'm a metal vocalist and seem to have an issue with my glottal attacks. The first note is always way off in a phrase, or I overcompensate and miss the correct note. I find myself recording the same take over and over, leading to fatigue. How can one learn to hit the first note in tune, but give it the same impact as a glottal attack? P.S. Thank you for your solfege exercises for baritone, tenor. I use them every day. Stay safe, my good man. Thank you. I appreciate that, and you stay safe as well. You're already doing what I would suggest, which is the solfege practice, and maybe something else too. Glottal attacks can be a habitual, they can just be a habit, something that you did before you started practicing vocal technique, and it's carried over now into your practice. And if it hasn't been directly addressed, it hasn't then changed since before you started to really work with vocal technique. Look at the glottal attack not as the end problem, but as a symptom of something else. That's how I look at glottal attacks. It's not that most people don't set off, they don't say to themselves like, I'm going to do a glottal attack because I really want to have that pop on the beginning of the phrase. They might want to really articulate the beginning of a phrase, and that glottal attack gives some semblance of that kind of immediacy of articulation. But ultimately, that I feel comes after exploring non-glottal attack alternatives. So they've started the A or ah vowel without the glottal attack, but it hasn't been very satisfying. And that latency in the attack is because there isn't good coordination between the onset of the flow of air and the closure of the vocal mechanism. So there's an exercise that I talk about very frequently. It sounds like this. I'll show you too on the piano. And those short little articulations challenge us to maintain our expansion and engagement during the articulation, as well as when I'm taking the breath. I'm taking a short breath in between every pitch. We have the melismatic scale at the end of the phrase to test ourselves. Can we maintain that kind of engagement over the duration of the longer phrase? That's a really, really good practice for challenging our arpeggio breath management techniques, and also really fine-tuning our coordination between the flow of air and the closure of the vocal mechanism. And when those things are working really, really well, then you'll get that nice, immediate, impactful attack. Will it be as aggressive as a glottal attack? Probably not, no. But what you might do is just save those glottal attacks for when you really, really need that something special. I would advise you to try to keep it out of the upper register of your voice and even out of the zone of the passaggio if you can, because that can really get fatiguing quickly and cause problems. So if you can save it for notes that are more comfortable, that would be great. But either way, work with that exercise and have choices so that you can save that like one glottal attack. You know, it's like in Spinal Tap, right? Like this one goes to 11, and then Rob Reiner says, well, what if you made 9 loud and 10 was at something louder? Well, this one goes to 11, right? Well, maybe that's a bad example, because we don't want to always go to 11 on every articulation and always use the glottal attack. But I still like talking about Spinal Tap. At any rate, give yourself, like, work with the coordination so you get that immediate tonal onset with the coordination practice. And then you can use the occasional glottal attack when you really, really need it, but save it for those special times. I hope that helps. Thank you. Oh, wait, that's the other thing. Okay. How to warm up with only 5 minutes to spare. Honestly, I would plan ahead a little better. I mean, you know, like if you booked the gig or your manager booked the gig, you must know it's coming. And barring unforeseen circumstances, hopefully you've arranged your day so that you have adequate time to warm up. I don't know, like, why you would generally find a need to have only 5 minutes to warm up. I would say plan your day a little bit better would be my actual advice for that. But on the odd times that you just, circumstances conspire against you, let's put it like that. So circumstances have conspired against you, and now you have 5 minutes. What do you do? I would warm up my body first and foremost. So like I would do physical activities like jumping jacks, maybe running around, just getting my body moving. And then I would probably do some lip trills just to kind of loosen things up and be able to work through the entirety of my range. So things like the, you know, the Rossini scale. Sorry, wrong note in there. I'll play it again. That's the scale for you. Things like the Rossini scale, things like that kind of work you through a wide range. And then if you have any flexibility at all, I would shift the set so that tunes that were really easy for me to sing were early in the set, and I could just continue to ease into my warm-up over those initial songs. How do get rid of nasally tone? How to get rid of nasally tone? My teacher said I need to lift my soft palate and focus on opening my pear, P-E-A-R, of resonance. I'm not sure what that means exactly. But when I sing, he says I still have a nasal quality to it. Okay, so perceptions are subjective, but let's just assume that you are singing with a lot of nasality. 1, you can do the nose pinch. There shouldn't be much of a difference in my sung voice because I'm reasonably well balanced in my resonance and all that kind of stuff, and I don't put more air through my sinus cavity than is necessary. If I did, you'll hear a very distinct change when I pinch my nose. If you could pinch my nose for me, you would feel my finger vibrating. You can practice trying to keep the air out of the sinus cavity, and you'll cease to feel those vibrations and you'll cease to hear that tonal change. It can take a little bit of practice. That's one way to do it. Another way to practice to kind of denasalify or balance out that nasal that pharyngeal resonance a bit better is with the NG sound. This is a semi-occluded exercise. If you say the word hung and you hold on to the NG, you'll feel the tongue in the rear of your mouth lift, and it actually closes the mouth off to the flow of air. So all the air goes out your nose. Once you've done that, you can then play with where the resonances lie. You can be very, very far forward. You can also be very far back. Somewhere in the middle is a good place to start. When you can put it forward and pull it way back and then find the middle again, you can then release the tongue. Work your way through your 5 cardinal vowels, and that will hopefully, even if your teacher still thinks you're a bit nasal, it will give you more control over how you are directing the flow of air and directing those resonances, and you can perhaps fall into a category that's more pleasing to your teacher. But please yourself too. If you're listening to recordings and you like what you hear, consider what you're singing and why you're singing it. Maybe there's no need to change. I don't know. You'll have to gauge that versus what your teacher is saying. Obviously, if it's so far forward that it's inhibiting your registration event practice, like it's making it difficult to seamlessly connect across the registers, that's a pretty good reason to make some adjustments there. When I sing in my head voice, the left side of my head hurts like a kind of thunder thingy. And also my lower back hurts as well when I sing. I'm not sure what to say about that. I've not heard those kinds of reports before. I'm inclined to suggest you maybe see your ENT or just talk to your general practitioner about it, a doctor, because I wonder about like a clogged ear or a clogged eustachian tube or something to that effect. It shouldn't hurt. Like that shouldn't hurt like that. Because it sounds like it's really painful. So yeah, consider that. And maybe chime back in on the next community questions and tell me what's going on. Because I've never really heard anything quite like that before. And it shouldn't hurt when we sing in our upper registers. That's not the way it always happens. Vowel modification. Yes, actually I answered this question in written format as well, but I'm going to skip to the bottom here to say, so they're talking about vowel modifications and how for baritones and basses, it's often the opposite of tenors, where, because like the baritone and bass power range is in the lower aspects of their range as opposed to the zona di passaggio, where they're making their way across the secondo passaggio. And for like tenors and altos and mezzos and sopranos, our vowel modifications widen as we ascend in order to facilitate good registration event practice and also cultivate all that lovely resonance and power that we so crave. And they're quoting Dorothy Uris here talking about that. And then they say, I often practice as a baritone and sometimes tenors sing in unison with the basses. When singing the tenor part, however, my inclination is to resist baritone modifications in verse going below G3, say. Perfectly reasonable. But I would love to hear your thoughts. And I'm making an assumption based on their user ID, which is choral tenor, in that this question is about choral singing. And that's just it. Singing in a chorus or a choir is not necessarily about the best individual, neutral vocal technique or vowel production. Most choral directors are most often talking about blending. They want a blended sound. They want the chorus to function as one voice. Until they don't, and they might want this or that or the other thing too, or there's a soloist or something like that. But the way that you may be asked to align your vowels in a chorus is not necessarily consistent with neutral vowel formation for you as a solo singer. And so you have to gauge very carefully how you're going to use your voice in those environments. Sometimes it's going to, like 99% of the time, it's going to be just fine and it's not going to be an issue. But be sensitive to it and know that if you are transitioning from a chorus into more solo repertoire, that there may be a period of adjustment as you look at your vowel alignment, look at how you are allowing resonances to cultivate in your voice, and assessing the neutral tone quality formation of your voice, which is to say that when you're here, if I were to sing that as a 9 scale, what I am allowing to occur, the way that I am cultivating the vowel shapes, the vowel modifications, the increase in volume as I engage more, as I get into the zona de passaggio, all of those things I do as a solo vocalist, knowing that that will result in the most consistent tone quality as I make my way through my vocal registers. You may not necessarily be doing those things when you're singing in a choir because the priority is to blend. So, like I said, I answered this question in written format, but in summary, sometimes your choral director is going to ask you to do things that aren't necessarily consistent with the habitual patterns and practices of your voice when you are singing solo. Take them in stride, do the best that you can with them in the effort of blending as best you can in the chorus, but know that transition time can be necessary if you're going back and forth between solo singing and choral singing. And for that matter too, if directors of choruses change, the new director's requirements may be different than the old. And that's just how it goes. And finally, not necessarily a question, but I saw you created a TikTok and wanted to raise awareness here for others who may be on the platform. And they actually left a link there for my TikTok too. Yep, I've been putting some of the shorts over on TikTok as well, just because I do so little like cross-platform stuff, and it kind of seemed fun. I don't know, it seems sort of fun to do TikTok, and I kind of do want to raise awareness for the channel, and the shorts seem to be doing really, really well. People seem to be enjoying them, and the channel seems to be responding very favorably to it. So yeah, I'm over on TikTok as well. If you like that platform, you can check me out there too. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this helpful. My name's Jeff. If you're still here, you've been chiming in a little bit, please do consider subscribing. I greatly appreciate it. I hope you have a lovely day. Take really good care of your voices, enjoy singing, and hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.